Very good morning to one and all present. So today's class will be on radiation physics. So this is a kind of a dry topic, but I will assure you that I'll try to make this topic as interesting as possible. So the outline of today's class will be saying about the history of X-rays, the composition of matter, the types of radiation, parts of an X-ray mission, about the production of X-rays. The rest of the chapters, that is the factors controlling X-ray beam, interaction of X-rays and dosimetry will be taken in the next class. Now, to begin with, let us see about the history of X-rays. As we all know, X-rays was first discovered by a person named Wilhelm Conrad Röntgen in 8th November 1895. He was a German physician and there was an interesting story behind his discovery of X-rays. So, he was actually working in his physics lab with a kind of a glass tube. One day, suddenly he noticed some glow was being emitted from the glass tube. Apparently, these glass tubes were actually kept in a dark room and there were some photographic plates inside in the dark room apparently. So he also published few papers after his discovery of X-rays, namely a new kind of rays, a preliminary communication, a new kind of rays continued, and further observations on a new kind of rays. So the first X-ray he took was with his wife Bertha's hand. So it was actually a 15 minutes exposure. So he discovered something called as X-rays. So this was the glass tube known as Coolidge tube. X-rays were passing through it. And so the first image shows you the first kind of X-ray production in the early 1890s. And this is the glass tube. Now, the important question that would arise would be when and why we need to take radiographs. So radiographs are indicated when you want to look beyond your clinical examination. That is, you want to see the periapical region example for the tooth or any lesion, wherein your clinical examination is inadequate, you need to take radiographs. So for a proper diagnosis, a combined clinical examination and a radiographic examination is very important. Now let us move into the physics part. The first part we are going to see is matter and its composition. Now what is matter? Matter is nothing but anything which occupies space and has mass. So this is basically the atomic structure of the fundamental unit of matter, which is the atoms. So inside the atom, we have the nucleus. In the nucleus, the protons and neutrons comprise the nucleus. Protons are positively charged and neutrons are neutral or they do not carry any charge. And outside the nucleus, we have the negatively charged electrons running in orbitals. The first model that was proposed for supporting this fundamental structure of atom was the Bohr-Rutherford model. So this model was compared to that of the solar system. So the nucleus is compared to that of the sun and all the electrons in the orbitals are compared to the planets that revolve around the sun. So there are different kinds of electron orbitals like K shell, L shell, M shell, etc. And the number of electrons would increase as the shell progresses. For example, in the first shell, we will have 2 electrons. In the second shell, we'll have 8 electrons. And the third shell, we have 18 electrons, so on. The two important forces that are actually essential for holding this atom together is the electrostatic force and the centrifugal force. So electrostatic force is responsible for bringing your positively charged protons and electrons. The force that is repelling them is the electrostatic force between your positive and your negative electron. It will try to attract the positively charged proton and the electron which is the negatively charged together. And centrifugal force is the force that is trying to pull the electrons away from your protons, which you can see in the arrow mark. And so this balance of electrostatic force and centrifugal force is what makes up your electrons to run around the orbitals around your positively charged nucleus. And for describing the classic view of the atom, two models have been proposed. One is a standard model and the second one is a quantum mechanical model. So this standard model describes the atom in the form of subatomic particles such as up quarks, down quarks, and electrons. So up quarks are nothing but it is nothing but your protons. So it is given in the name of an up quark, and you have your down quarks. So these up quarks and down quarks, they combine to form your neutrons and protons in the atomic nucleus. Now, this is the microscopic structure within the atom. So the size of a quark can be less than 10 to the power of 19 meter. A nucleus can be of the size of 10 to the power of minus 14 meter. An electron to the size of 10 to the power of minus 18 meter. And your neutron and proton, which comprise your nucleons, would be of the size of 10 to the power of minus 15 meter. It is said that if the protons and neutrons in the picture were actually 10 centimeter across, then the quarks and electrons would be less than 0.1 mm in its size, and the entire atom would actually be 10 kilometer across. So this is the microscopic structure within the atom. The second model is the quantum mechanical model. So this model describes the arrangement of electrons in an atom. So basically it talks about the different kind of orbitals, that is the electrons, how they revolve around the nucleus. So the electron orbitals are actually clouds of varying density. And for example, there is an S type of electron orbital, which is spherical. So S denotes the spherical and it's centered around the nucleus. The P-type electron orbitals are bilobed and centered around the nucleus. And the 4 D-type electron orbitals are kind of clover lobes, which is centered around the nucleus. There is also a 5th type of electron orbital known as D-type electron orbital, which is again bilobe with an encircling ring. The next important concept is known as ionization. So what is this ionization? Ionization is nothing but the process of forming an ion pair. So when your number of electrons in an atom is equal to the number of protons in the nucleus, the atom is said to be electrically neutral. If a neutral atom loses an electron, it becomes a positive ion, and the free electron there. So because since it loses an positive ion, electron and becomes a positive ion, it has got a free electron that becomes your, so this is the free electron and that becomes your negative ion. So this process is known as ionization, and it is important because, and for ionization, it requires sufficient energy to overcome the electron binding energy, that forces we earlier we talked about, the centrifugal and the electrostatic force. And so the binding energy of the electron is related to the atomic number. So there's another concept known as atomic number. It is actually denoted by the letter Z, which is your number of protons. So this binding energy should be sufficient to overcome the atomic number of the atom and your orbital type. The next part we are going to see is radiation and its types. Now, what is radiation? Radiation is nothing but the transmission of energy through space and matter. There are 2 types of radiation. The first one is known as the particulate radiation, and the second one is known as the electromagnetic radiation. So particulate radiation talks about the radiation that is in the form of particles. So generally, larger atoms tend to be unstable in nature because they have an unequal amount of protons and neutrons within the nucleus. So they always undergo spontaneous decay to form certain other subatomic particles. So they dissociate to form the alpha particle, which is your helium nucleus. They emit a gamma ray. And apart from that, the particles that we already talked about, the fundamental structure of atom, there is a proton, neutron, and electron. So larger atoms, because they are unstable, they release certain amount of particles and energy. So this is known as the particulate radiation. There's another important concept in particulate radiation, which is known as linear energy transfer. Linear energy transfer is nothing but your rate of loss of energy from a particle, because whenever a particle moves along its track, it loses some amount of, it moves through the matter or tissue, it loses some amount of energy which is proportionate to the movement. That is known as your linear energy transfer. So a particle will lose the kinetic energy each time it ionizes the adjacent matter. That is why your high-speed electrons or beta particles are said to be densely ionizing. Sorry, they are not set densely ionizing because they can penetrate the matter to a greater depth. The second concept of a type of radiation is known as electromagnetic radiation, which is nothing but your movement of energy through a combination of electric field and magnetic field. So it is generally generated when your velocity of the electrically charged particle is altered. And the quantum theory describes this electromagnetic radiation as small discrete bundles. So they consider electromagnetic radiation in the form of photons. So nothing but it describes the radiation energy in the form of waves. So here you have the electromagnetic spectrum, and based upon the wavelength, the ionizing energy would increase. So if you have increasing wavelength particles, they are said to be generally non-ionizing as the wavelength is increased, and those which shorter wavelength are said to be densely ionizing. Densely ionizing, like your X-rays and gamma rays, your ultraviolet and infrared are towards the middle of the spectrum, and your general non-ionizing radiations would comprise of your radio waves, microwaves. They have a kind of a low frequency. So different sources of non-ionizing radiation would be your power lines, your radio, TV, microwave oven, and your densely ionizing radiation would be medical X-rays, arc welding, and radioactive sources. So these are the general properties of X-rays. X-rays are said to have a short wavelength. They have a selective penetration and absorption power. They have the property of fluorescence. They cause ionization of matter. They have biological damaging effects that you will see in detail in radiation biology, how they have the deterministic and stochastic effects. They travel at the speed of light. They are invisible, cannot be felt or heard, do not have odor. They do not have mass or charge, cannot be focused or collected by the lens. They cannot be reflected or refracted and cannot be deviated by the magnetic field. Now the next part would be about the X-ray machine and the X-ray tube. So generally, X-ray machines produce X-rays that pass through the patient's tissue and they strike a digital receptor or film to make a radiographic image. So your X-ray machine comprises of your X-ray tube and your power supply. We'll be seeing about the X-ray tube in detail. So this is the schematic diagram of your X-ray tube. So it comprises of a cathode and anode, which is in an evacuated glass envelope or a tube. So your cathode comprises of a filament and a focusing cup. So cathode is negatively charged. So the filament is actually the source of electrons within the X-ray tube. The filament basically comprises of a coil of tungsten wire, which is roughly around 1 centimeter or less in length and 2 mm in diameter. They also contain 1% thorium to increase the release of electrons from the heated wire when you switch on your power supply. So this filament is mounted between two stiff support wires that carry the electrical current. The mounting wires will lead you through the glass envelope, and they are connected to a high voltage and low voltage electrical sources. And the filament is said to be heated to low incandescence by the flow of current from the low voltage source, and it emits electrons at a rate proportional to the temperature of the filament. So this filament is in a focusing cup. So focusing cup is generally made up of molybdenum. So it is parabolic in shape so that it can electrostatically focus the electrons emitted from the filament into your anode, which is the focal spot. So that we'll be seeing. So here cathode is negatively charged and your anode is positively charged, and it comprises of a tungsten. It comprises of a block of tungsten target embedded in a copper stem. So this is your anode. So X-ray, the electrons are focused to hit the target in the anode, and down you can see a big arrow wherein your useful X-ray beam is emitted from your tube window. The other kind of beam that touches the glass envelope would be your scattered radiation. So here you have a picture. The figure A shows you a dental stationary X-ray tube with cathode on the left and anode on the right. Figure B shows you the cross section of a focusing cup which contains the filament. You can see the purple arrow marking. Figure C shows your copper anode with your tungsten target. That is a block of tungsten target embedded in a copper stem. Now, what is the purpose of using tungsten as target? It is because it has got high atomic number, high melting point, high thermal conductivity, and low vapor pressure at the working temperature of your X-ray tube. So again, this is your schematic diagram which shows you the angle of the target to the central X-ray beam has a strong influence on the apparent size of your focal spot. So here you have two terminologies, which is known as the actual focal spot size and the effective focal spot size. So your effective would be generally lesser than your actual focal spot size, would probably around 1 mm, wherein you get your useful X-ray beam. So your projected focal spot is actually smaller than your actual focal spot. It is so that it provides a beam, and a smaller effective focal spot produces images with higher resolution and also lesser heat dissipation to the anode. There is also something called as a rotating anode. Generally, X-ray tubes comprise of a stationary anode. The purpose of using a rotating anode is to dissipate your heat, and by using it also has got a smaller focal spot size. It keeps rotating so that your heat is evenly distributed so that you don't overheat your X-ray tube. Now this figure shows you about the power supply. It is a schematic dental X-ray machine circuitry and the X-ray tube. The components are labeled so your operator can select the desired kVp, which is your kilo voltage peak. That is your tube voltage. The second important aspect is your tube current, which is measured in milliamperage, and your timer, which is in seconds. So these are the factors which will control your X-ray beam that you'll be seeing in the next class. So generally, you require a higher tube voltage to generate the electrons so that you can hit the tungsten target. So that potential difference between your anode and cathode can give you sufficient electrons with sufficient energy to generate the X-rays. So the actual voltage is adjusted with the auto transformer. So they use a auto transformer. There's a high voltage transformer. It will boost your kilo voltage peak with the incoming line of current. And they generally use a 60 cycle auto current. And there is a figure B shows you the voltage at the anode will vary from 0 to the desired kVp. Generally, X-ray machines operate at a 70 kilo voltage peak. And figure C shows you intensity of radiation, that is the blue marking. That is intensity of radiation produced at the anode is generally strongly dependent on the anode voltage, and it is highest when your tube voltage is at peak. So that is proportionate to your tube voltage. The other important aspects is your tube rating and your duty cycle. So each X-ray machine comes with a tube rating chart. It will describe your longest exposure time of the tube that can be energized for a range of kilo voltage and tube current without any risk of you do not heat your anode. That is, you do not overheat your anode, so your X-ray tube doesn't get damaged. So it comes with a desired tube rating. It comes with your desired kilo voltage peak and your tube current, and it will measure your longest exposure time. The second aspect is your duty cycle, which relates to the frequency with which your successive exposures can be made without overheating the anode. These are all some of the measures in which you do not overheat your anode so that the X-ray tube is not damaged. Now, the last aspect of the class is on production of X-rays. So production of X-rays, generally, we all know that high-speed electrons travel from the filament in the cathode to hit the target anode and release this energy as heat. So X-rays are produced through two types of radiation. Production of X-rays occurs through two types. The first one is known as Bremsstrahlung radiation, and the second one is known as characteristic radiation. So Bremsstrahlung radiation, when there is a sudden stopping of your high-speed electrons by the tungsten nuclei in the target, it produces Bremsstrahlung photons. So Bremsstrahlung radiation is the primary source of X-ray radiation. Bremsstrahlung, the word is a German word. It means breaking radiation. So there are actually two pathways in your Bremsstrahlung radiation. The first one is known as direct hit interaction, and the first one is known as near miss interaction. So whenever your high-speed electrons pass by the tungsten nuclei, it has got two pathways, near miss or wide miss interaction. So in these interactions, the electron is usually attracted towards your positively charged nuclei, and its path is altered towards the nucleus and it loses some of its velocity. This causes deceleration to lose the kinetic energy, which is given in the form of many new photons. So in near miss interaction, whenever there is an incident high energy electron, it will try to hit the positively charged nucleus in the target. Sometimes it can go near the target, but does not directly hit it. It can go below or above the nucleus. So it will have an altered path of deflection, or a decelerated electron is produced. So since it does not directly hit it and has a low energy, so it produces your Bremsstrahlung photon of a low energy. Whereas in direct hit interaction, it has got sufficient high energy to hit the nucleus directly, and it will produce a Bremsstrahlung photon of maximal energy. So Bremsstrahlung interaction generally it generates X-ray photons with continuous spectrum of energy, and the energy of the X-ray beam is usually identified by your peak operating voltage. For example, what does it mean is that you have a dental X-ray machine operating at a peak kilo voltage peak of 70 kVp. It will produce continuous spectrum of energies of photons with 70 keV. That is known as Bremsstrahlung radiation. It is because it has a continuous varying voltage difference between your cathode and anode target, and the bombarding electrons will pass at varying distances around the tungsten nuclei. That is why you have two parts of interactions. And mostly the electrons participating in multiple Bremsstrahlung interactions, they will lose all their kinetic energy before they hit the target. So as a consequence, the electron carries different amounts of energy after successive interactions with the tungsten nuclei. So Bremsstrahlung radiation is the major source of primary radiation, and only a small fraction is produced, energy is produced through characteristic radiation. So it contributes only a small fraction of photons in the X-ray beam. So in characteristic radiation, you have four pathways. Your incident high energy electron, it can eject an electron from the inner orbital as shown in figure A, and it will create a vacancy, and that it creates a photoelectron, a recoil electron, that is seen in figure B and C. So when it tries to hit the target, it will create a vacancy in the inner orbital that is shown in figure B and C. So to fill the vacancy, an electron again from the outer orbital will try to fill the vacancy with the inner orbital. And when it tries to fill the vacancy, some amount of energy is produced. That is your characteristic radiation of photon that is shown in figure C. So this cycle keeps continuing again as shown in figure D. A high energy level electron from the outer orbital will try to go and fill the inner orbital. So a vacancy will be created again from successive orbitals. There are different multiple orbitals in an atom. So we just saw the microscopic structure. So when the outer orbital electron displaces the electron within the inner orbital, the photon is emitted. The energy of the photon is equivalent to the difference in the binding energy of the two orbitals. So the energy of the characteristic photons are discrete because they represent the difference of energy. So that difference of energy between your orbitals is equal to the energy of the photon that is produced, and they are characteristic of the target atoms. So with this, we come to the end of today's class. If you have any questions, you can post it in this presentation. I will always be available in the department, and any questions or any doubts, you can approach me. Thank you.